Hello and welcome. My name is Vineet Malhotra and you're watching World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top stories at this hour. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said that Washington and Beijing reached a preliminary trade consensus in Kuala Lumpur ahead of next week's Trump-Xi meeting. Talks covered soybean purchases, fentanyl cooperation and lots more. A U.S. warship arrived in Trinidad and Tobago on Sunday for joint naval exercises near Venezuela's coast. The move comes as Washington increases pressure on Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro. The vessel was spotted off the port of Spain days after its arrival was confirmed by the Trinidadian government. Sudan's Rapid Support Forces said Sunday it had seized full control of Al-Fashir, the last major city in western Darfur outside its control. The RSF claimed to have taken the city from mercenaries and militias loyal to the Sudanese army amidst the ongoing conflict since April. Russia's top economic negotiator, Kirill Dmitriev, criticized what he called titanic attempts to hinder talks with Washington as he arrived in the U.S. for discussions with American officials. He said that Moscow remains committed to a constructive dialogue despite new sanctions on Russian oil firms. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel will act independently in defending itself in Gaza and Lebanon despite recent ceasefires. He emphasized that the country does not seek approval from any foreign power and will control its own security decisions. Well, the leaders of Thailand and Cambodia have signed an enhanced ceasefire deal in Kuala Lumpur in the presence of U.S. President Donald Trump, formally ending their deadly border conflict. The agreement builds on the July truce brokered after Trump urged both sides to halt fighting or risk losing trade talks with Washington. Well, the French police have arrested two suspects after thieves stole crown jewels worth 88 million euros from the Louvre in a daylight raid. One man was detained at the Charles de Gaulle airport while trying to flee as officials admit security failures left France with a terrible image. The Kurdish military group PKK calls on Turkey to take immediate legal steps to safeguard the peace process and allow its fighters to enter democratic politics. In a statement from northern Iraq, the group said that freedom and democratic integration laws must be implemented without delay. All right, and some more updates coming from the U.S. administration on the ongoing trade talks with China. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said that the upcoming Trump-Xi trade deal will bring strong benefits for American soybean farmers, with China resuming large-scale purchases of U.S. soybeans. Speaking to U.S. media, Bessent confirmed that a tariff hike on Chinese goods has been averted and that Beijing agreed to delay its new rare earth export licensing regime for a year. He said that the agreement will provide stability for several years in agricultural trade and marks a key step towards restoring a balanced U.S.-China relations. Andrew Latham, Professor of International Relations, is joining us from Minneapolis at this point in time. Andrew, always good to have you. Well, you know, it's a good start between the Americans and the Chinese, but I'm sure when it comes to these superficial exchanges, there is more than what meets the eye. Donald Trump has categorically said that so far, whatever China has done, even in response to his tariff aggression, has not been enough.
Yes, well, it is a handshake at the moment. It's not a deal that's been signed, sealed, and delivered. We haven't seen the fine print, metaphorically. We don't know what's going on there. We do know that these trade disputes are emblematic, symptomatic of a deeper conflict between China and the United States. Sometimes that's around things like rare earth elements, critical minerals that are strategically important in terms of military kit and whatnot. So that's there. But also in terms of access to markets, in terms of the American project of friendshoring or reshoring, bringing manufacturing back from China to North America and specifically to the United States. So there's a lot still on the table. I see this as a détente rather than a deal. I see that this as a temporary respite, not a resolution to the issues between China and the US. But all things being said, it's a positive sign.
Andrew, what do you make of, of course, this is trade that we are talking about, but at the outset, there are, differences between the Americans and the Chinese when it comes to a number of issues. Of course, Taiwan is something that comes to the fore. Can all these negotiations and trade talks happen in isolation without looking at what's brewing in Taiwan at this point in time?
No, and I was kind of hinting at that a little earlier. I think the era of great power competition, which pits minimally the United States against China, not just in the South China Sea and not just with respect to Taiwan, but globally, in Africa, in a certain sense, in the Arctic, in parts of Europe, et cetera, Latin America as well. So that the tensions between the frictions between these two countries are not going to go away. They are particularly manifest and obvious when it comes to disagreements over Taiwan. The United States, for many decades, tried to pretend that the Taiwan issue was not an issue, and did China. During the era of globalization, US and China were trading, and Taiwan and China were trading a lot as well. But under Xi Jinping, nationalism has become a more important legitimating narrative in the People's Republic of China, Beijing. And part of that narrative is we need to get Taiwan back. And so they are preparing to take Taiwan, either by diplomatic means, by military means, if necessary. And the United States is drawing a line and saying, no way. Not just because of the semiconductor production on the island, but because it would sever the first island chain, which is part of an American strategy to contain China. Taiwan is really important to the United States, and it's really important to China. And it remains to be seen how that's going to be resolved. It won't be through a handshake in Kuala Lumpur. I know that for sure.
You're right about that. Andrew, stay on with us. A U.S. warship has arrived just off the coast of Venezuela in Trinidad and Tobago for joint exercises amid escalating tensions between Washington and Caracas. The vessel was seen off the coast of Port of Spain after its arrival was announced earlier by Trinidad's government. The deployment comes just days after a deadly strike on a Venezuelan patrol boat that President Maduro blamed as foreign aggression by the United States. Meanwhile, the U.S. continues to accuse President Nicolás Maduro's government of corruption and human rights abuses. This comes amidst rising tensions between the two nations as Washington increases its military presence near Venezuela, citing anti-narcotics operations. Andrew Latham still with us. Andrew, what do you make of this muscle flexing that's taking place when it comes to the relationship between the United States and Venezuela? A lot of it has to do with the drugs that continue to irritate the American administration, and Venezuela, in fact, instead of halting any kind of its export, is getting extremely defensive about it.
Yes, and I think the drugs, the narcotics trade is only part of a very complicated picture. The Americans have two concerns with respect to Venezuela, one of which has to do with organized crime and narcotics. And so the presence of an American destroyer at Trinidad and Tobago is not surprising. Trinidad and Tobago belongs to, along with the United States, the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative, which is about dealing with organized crime and narcotics in the Caribbean. So this is not unprecedented, and it's not a precursor to an all-out war on the part of the United States. Having said that, though, narcotics and organized crime are only part of the picture. From Washington's perspective, from Donald Trump's perspective, Venezuela is drifting into the Chinese camp, the Russian camp, perhaps in geopolitical terms, and for deep historical reasons, the Monroe Doctrine, etc., but also for reasons having to do with this moment in history, this great power competition. The United States does not want to see China's or Russia's, but especially China's influence enhanced in what it considers to be its hemisphere, the Western Hemisphere. So this is operating in two different registers on two different levels. I don't think that the dispatch of a single destroyer to Trinidad and Tobago signals anything other than we're serious about the Caribbean, we're serious about Venezuela. It's not a precursor to an invasion or a grand strike against Venezuela.
Andrew, always a pleasure having you. Thank you so much. All right, well, Argentines head to the polls today for midterm legislative elections that could shape President Javier Milei's economic future. The vote will test support for his controversial free market reforms and austerity measures. Milei's party, La Libertad Avanza, hopes to gain more seats in Congress to secure investor confidence and U.S. backing. The White House has praised Milei's progress in reduction of inflation and achieving a fiscal surplus. However, his popularity has dipped due to cuts in public spending and a corruption scandal involving his sister. A strong showing in the elections could help Milei push through his economic agenda. Mark Sutherland, geopolitical expert, is joining us from London at this point in time. Mark, appreciate you joining us. Well, what do you make of these midterm elections? For most part, people are hailing what the economic situation in Argentina looks like today. Of course, there's been a long-standing ban on selling dollars. There are other restrictions that have been done away with, which of course have led to the popularity of the current leader. But is it going to, in fact, continue beyond this point in time? And let's not forget that the American support also matters a lot here.
Well, Benny, good to be with you, and it's interesting to hear Andrew's comments, your previous guest, because it's all within that same theatre influence and concern that America has. Milei has come in as a populist leader, has wanted to then release this whole power of privatization to empower people to be able to run their own business, run their own lives. And as you quite rightly say, the problem is when there is that smell of the incident with his sister, that this may not particularly help on one level in regard to the elections that are coming up. It's always about the ideological fight that is constantly going on within South America, and also that other countries, Paraguay, Ecuador, Bolivia, are then looking to Argentina, in my humble opinion, because then they want to get out of the previous ideological mire of thinking of collectivization, and are then looking to Milei, to Argentina, of how they are being able to progress and empower people. And they are looking at what is happening in Argentina closely. And of course, all of this within then using the capitalist system, that is a system that's taken more people out of poverty than any other system. That, of course, is number one within America, is what they stand on. Hence why this focus from them right now in regard to what's going on. Hence why Milei has pushed through all of his policies through in this particular way, to then increase privatization, to cut back welfare spending, and with the then empowering people to fill that gap themselves with being able to run their own businesses. So you and I need a number of hours to discuss all this, but that's my assessment. Benny.
You're quite right about that. Stay with us. In fact, meanwhile, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent reassured that American taxpayers won't lose funds from U.S. support for Argentina. This comes as the U.S. bought Argentine pesos and secured a $20 billion currency swap with Argentina's central bank. Bessent further emphasized that the U.S. is backing a Latin American ally during its key election. Bessent stressed that the move was from the Treasury's Exchange Stabilization Fund and is not a bailout. He said it has never registered a loss. The U.S. is also buying pesos on the open market to stabilize the currency. Bessent added that the support aims to prevent Argentina from facing the same crisis as Venezuela. Mark, in fact, Donald Trump was very, very clear about that. He said the $20 billion bailout for Argentina is going to be rescinded if Milei suffers a defeat at the hands of a socialist or a communist, ending this alliance or a transactional relationship with Argentina at this point in time. Pretty straightforward.
Absolutely. And as your previous guest, Andrew, was talking about Taiwan, China, we're talking, this is an ideological fight that is going on across the world. We have to remember in the Biden administration, the sort of convoy of people walking to the American border to cross over illegally into the American border. This is an ideological fight. You then turn to what President Trump has been addressing within within America in regard to illegal immigration, in regard to then addressing people that are within the country, dealing with Antifa, BLM. All of these things are relevant because he's then, as I mentioned earlier, before you were quite rightly talking about this, Besant's comments, is all relevant because it's all tied in with that ideology. It's about building up a bulwark within South America. And when you mentioned Venezuela, let's just remind ourselves. Previously, you know, it was it is a wealthy country asset-wise, has all of that oil that it needs to be drilling out and selling, and then being able to empower people to run their own lines and set up their own businesses. You have used the word communist quite rightly. This is the ideology that we are then dealing with. That someone like Trotsky would be extremely pleased to see that that ideology has gone around the world in the spreading that ideology and thought pattern and then behavior around the world. And that is what President Trump, his administration, and those countries within South America then want to push back on and be a bulwark against that, Benit.
All right. Mark, appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much for your perspective. All right, moving on. Kurds in Turkey's southeastern Diyarbakır province have said that they expect steps from the government as part of ending the decade-long fighting between the military and Kurdish militants after the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK, said that it is withdrawing from Turkey. Some residents of the Diyarbakır have reacted to the situation. Let's listen in.
ميزة دولتي شبكة دولتي ببر بجر يفرلميش ببي ورن بأم قومي مرنا في خلكي برا خلت عداي هنا الوابك خلكي هي تعدل الوابك بقى هرجي لذاتي ناوين مرة هر كدري ميزة بت شو ميرجيدا زيشكر قولم هر كدري قونا ممري ميزة براش خورق توبلا مش كن تركيا خورق ياشام مش ببن برا Türkiye ders bira Türkiye jera hakiki bira bebin.
Türkiye'de bir savaş bitirmesi lazım. Kürtler için de iyidir, Türkler için de iyidir. Zaten Orta Doğu bozuktur ama her taraf savaştır. Önce zaten bunların gayesi Abdullah Öcalan'ın serbest bırakılması, tutsakların serbest bırakılması, hatta bir genel af olması lazımdır. Tamam. Ondan sonra Kürt dili genellikleri her şeyi örf adedi serbest bırakacak. Kürtleri tanıyacak, Kürt kimliği tanıyacak. Budur, başka bir şey yoktur.
Valla devlete mesajım şu. Kan akmasın, barış olsun. Başka da bir şey istemiyorum. Yani bunu samimiyetle söylüyorum. Budur. Başka bir şey söyleyecek lafım yok. Yani yeter ki kan akmasın, barış olsun. Budur. Teşekkür.
All right, and meanwhile, Turkey has hailed a move by Kurdish militants to withdraw from Turkish territory to northern Iraq on Sunday as a concrete result in efforts to end the 4-decade-long conflict. Omar Çelik, spokesman for President Erdogan, has stated that the PKK's decision to withdraw from Turkey and the announcement of new steps towards disarmament process are concrete results of progress. Mark Sutherland, a geopolitical expert, still with us from London. Mark, of course, long-standing conflict. 4 decades is a long time for any country to be embroiled in any kind of a conflict. This is, of course, not the age of conflict. And as we can see, a number of these conflicts around the world have come to an end. Of course, this is a bit of good news coming in. Your thoughts?
Indeed, yes, as you've just said, any conflict that is ending, it is good news if it is genuinely ending. And the PKK, with the as we look at various reports, with the release of Abdullah Öcalan, if I have that pronunciation right, which was, I think, quite a surprise as the PKK leader, quite a surprise to the PKK in this situation, surprise to the Kurdish people. But he is now turning around and saying, you're right, after the 4 decades, estimates maybe losing the 50,000 people lives have been lost in this conflict, that we're withdrawing. Now Turkey needs to put in place within government to be sincere with what the Kurds have asked for, and to be sincere about that and to back that up on a policy level. So this is where we are at. And I think, Benita, as you have just said, it's a very good reminder. We need to remind ourselves that there are, very sadly, a number of conflicts that are going on in the world that need to be sorted out. We've had all this focus on what's happening in Gaza and Israel, and then we have forgotten in regard to other conflicts that are taking place, and that is always a good thing when we're now paying attention to those, like Nigeria, for argument's sake, or the Sudan, or in this case, with what's happening between the Kurds and Turkey. Benit.
All right, Mark, appreciate you joining us once again. All right, Slovakia's Prime Minister Robert Fico has or will not take part in any European Union program aimed at financing military help for Ukraine in its fight against Russia's invasion. Fico has also criticized EU sanctions against Russia for its war in Ukraine, saying they are hurting Europe more. Slovakia and Hungary, both buyers of Russian energy supplies, are now facing US sanctions on Russian oil companies. Rosneft and Lukoil due to come into effect next month. Meanwhile, Slovakia stopped state military and for Ukraine when Fico's government came to power in 2023, but he has still allowed commercial sales. Fico differs with European Union and the states on the war, saying that a solution is not on the battlefield. Listen in.
Ako predseda vlády Slovenskej republiky odmietam, aby sa Slovensko zúčastnilo na akýkoľvek finančnej schéme, ktorej cieľom je pomôcť Ukrajine zvládať vojnu a vojenské výdavky. Môže vykrikovať Korčok a ďalší, že ani náboj. Áno, zadarmo ani náboj. Keď si od nás chce niečo kúpiť, predáme. Prečo nie? Ak dnes Spojené štáty majú plné sklady zbraní a hovoria, kupujte od nás a dávajte na Ukrajinu. Ak sme my schopní niečo vyrobiť takéhoto typu, nech sa páči, kto chce, nech si od nás kúpi. To znamená ani náboj. Znamená, že zadarmo nepôjde žiadna smrtiaca pomoc na Ukrajinu a nezúčastníme sa žiadnej schémy, ktorá by viedla k tomu, že budeme financovať vojenské potreby Ukrajiny. Nenakupujeme ropu my znovu, to je maďarská rafinéria. No, problém bude v tom, že jediný problém môže byť v tom, že budeme kupovať drahšiu ropu a že bude všetko drahšie. To je výsledok všetkých týchto sankcií. Čiže opäť sa potvrdilo, že nie je poškodený ten, voči komu tá sankcia je určená, ale poškodení sme my, ktorí...
All right, at least 2 workers were killed in an oil pipeline fire in Iraq's Zubair outfield. There was no impact on oil flows as the throughput, is at 400,000 barrels per day. The fire has also left 5 workers seriously injured, broke out as a team was carrying out welding work near the pipeline. Firefighters were working to extinguish the fire, which broke out on a section of the pipeline that transports crude oil from the Zubair field to nearby storage tanks. Meanwhile, Iraq's oil ministry has stated that the fire originated from a gas leak in an old pumping system at the Zubair oil storage depot, confirming that 1 employee of the Basra oil company was killed and 4 others were wounded. But that's all we have for now. Keep watching NewsX World for more news.